All right, guys, welcome. This is Mr. Cortez with something. I want to try something new, and I want to see how this goes. But I'm going to start with an introduction to music history. So, introduction to music history, and history and music always goes hand in hand with what's happening in the world, and it gives it a much more significance of importance. So here's our two things on how we can get, what we can get out of music history. Historical context, meaning what is the history of what's going on in the world in music? How did things advance? But we're also going to do some listening, which is going to help us identify instruments, the form of music, which I'll explain when we go further, and the lyrics if it's a song. So here's what we have. We have 6 periods in music history. We have medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, 20th and 21st century. And this is here where we are in our lives, the 20th and 21st century, where we have just a lot of music, rock, rap, hip-hop, pop, country, EDM, so forth. But for this specific lesson, we're going to focus on medieval. So we're going to take our police box time travel and go to medieval times where we had a lot of royalty ruling the land. So medieval period was from 1150 to 1400. So that's a long time ago, very long time ago. And in the Western world, kings and queens ruled their lands. And here's something important. Western world. When I mean that, I mean places like Europe, America, South America. That's kind of considered the Western world. What's considered Eastern will be Asia, Australia. I guess you could consider Africa, or maybe Africa could be in both of those two. But we're going to focus on Western music. During that time, they practice Christianity, which is a religion that's being practiced to this day. But Christianity was practiced by the majority of people in Europe. So here's what I like to do to give you an idea of what's going on in the world at that time, which is called context. So here's some events that happened during this time of 1100 to 1400. We have something called the Magna Carta in 1215, which was a document which limited the usage of power from kings and queens. Because let's remember, at this time, kings and queens ruled the land, and what they said was the law. We had something called the Siege of Acre, which was a crusade. Crusade is a military voyage to a land, in this case, which was a venture to Israel, where a group of people went to try to take back the land of Israel because it was called the Holy Land. And this happened a few times in this time. This was known as like the Third Crusade. We had something called the Great Famine, which was a time which take place in like 2 years, where a lot of plants, vegetation crops that farmers grew were dying, were not growing for a great amount of time, which greatly affected people. And the final thing is we have the Black Plague, which is a sickness that happened in that time, which affected a lot of people. So here's a couple of things that happened to give you an idea of what happened. We have few languages that people spoke at that time. One that was spoken a lot, which was also very popular, was something called Latin, which is known as a dead language. Nobody really speaks Latin anymore, unless you use it for research purposes or if you are a artist or singer. Another language that was very popular was French. Greek, which was spoken east of the Roman Empire. And Arabic, which was spoken in Spain. So here's what we're looking for when we're going through the medieval times. We have something called monophony, which is a single instrument or voice played, sung by itself with no accompaniment. When I say accompaniment, it is music that's being played to support an instrument. So an example of accompaniment in our modern day would probably be a piano supporting a singer when they're singing. We have another thing called Gregorian chant, which is sung by monks, a group of monks which sang on the same thing. It happens a lot during this time. Here are the instruments I want to focus on. We have a recorder, a flute, and a lute. Our recorder, and this is something that we were trying to learn in school. We're going to listen to an example of medieval music played from a recorder. So that is a short example of how a recorder sounds. And before I go on, we're going to be seeing this a lot, a number followed by a word called century. This means for example, 14th century means the years in the 1300s that are leading up to the 1400s, and a century, which is basically 100 years. So moving on, we have a flute, a medieval flute, which is played in the same style of our modern day flute. They're mostly made out of wood, like most of these instruments. So here's an example of a medieval flute. I'm going to stop it right there. That is an example of a medieval flute, which is well done by this performer. Moving on, we have a lute. A lute is a early version of a guitar. So you notice that's kind of smaller compared to your real guitar. It has about 9 strings. I guess you could say it's kind of like shaped after a teardrop. That's how I kind of see it. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna show you 3 different people who made a impact on the music scene and how it just grew to something else. Our first person is a German nun called Hildegard von Bingen, or Hildegard of Bingen. Second person we have is Guillaume de Machaut, who is French. We have 2 people. I couldn't find the other person's picture, which is kind of hard to find for this time. But we have Léonin and Pérotin, who are also French. Before I move on, go back to a reminder. Church or religion was a huge part of people's lives in Europe. Most of vocal music was created and sung by the church, but there was secular music. And when I say secular music, or secular means non-religion. So there was secular music performed outside of the church. When I say secular music, it could be about a lot of things like love, happiness, sadness, feelings, food, animals, anything that's not religious based. But during that time, since a lot of people really practiced Christianity, a lot of the music was performed by people who are part of the church community. And music was also made for and about the religion. And the religion usually talked a lot about God, Jesus Christ, and Virgin Mary. So going forth, I just wanted to give you that reminder. For educational purposes, this is what was happening during this time. So focusing on just one person for right now, I'm going to go to our first person, Hildegard, the female nun. And she was known for her visions and prophecies. A vision, which is something that you see will happen, which is also a prophecy. She was a person who wrote her prophecies into poems, and she would put her poems to music. Her melodies were something that the church, people who practiced the religion at that time, which was Christianity, didn't like much. And there was very strict rules on what people sang and performed, wrote during that time. If it was religious based, she used a lot of note leaps and wide ranges of pitches, which was something that was way different from the rules of the church. The church loved to use single step wise motions of notes. So when they would hear something like that, they would just think that it was kind of ungodly. So her music gave emphasis on words. And I'll show you an example. But for example, let's say the word will be called Christus, which is Christ. Most of the song will be sung on one syllable. So for example, the first syllable in Christus is Kri. most of the song will be sung on that kri syllable, and it'll be so many notes. And the other part of the song will be stus, and then the whole other half of the song will be many notes just being sung on tus, which is really interesting. So I'm going to give you a example of how this music kind of sounds. And the title of this is called Ave Generosa. And I'll read to you the words in Latin, because that's what most of the music sung from the church was sung in. And I'll give you a snippet of what it means in English. Ave Generosa, gloriosa et intacta puella, tu pupilla castitatis, tu materia sanctitatis, quae Deo placuit, nam hec supernam fusio intefuit, corsum pernum verbum in te carnem induit, tu candidum lilium, quod Deus ante omnem creaturam expexit. The translation of that is, I behold you, noble, glorious, and whole woman, the pupil of purity. Ooh. You are the sacred matrix in which God takes great pleasure. This essence of heaven flooded into you. The great word of God dressed itself in the flesh. You appeared as a shining white lily as God looked upon you before all of creation, which is a very interesting translation. There's a lot of words that try to paint a picture of what they're trying to talk about. Words like, where is it? Words as appeared as a shining white lily. Ooh. Dressed itself in flesh. Essences of heaven. So this is an idea of how music back then was written. Here, I'm going to show you a short example of how this music sounds. I want you to think of what kind of instrument is being played or sung. I want you to see how the notes move with your ears. So here is Ave Generosa. So if you're noticing, it's just one voice. It's being sung by itself. This is an example of monophony. Stop it right there. Here is an example of vocal music being sung in the medieval times. As you can see, it was just one voice by itself singing a religious text of music. I'm going to stop it right here. Yeah. I'm going to stop it right here, and I'm going to continue this another time. Keep in mind, I will have to admit that this music is kind of hard or difficult to get into because first it's sung in a different language that most of us don't know because it is a language that nobody speaks. It's also a just very different style of music compared to what we have right now. And the message of the music is very different to what we're kind of used to in our modern day life or music that we consume in our lives. But it's just a snippet for educational purposes of how music started from here and just evolves through time to what we have right now. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.